For those of you who are not familiar with CTL, we're headquartered in Portland, Oregon, and have been providing innovative IT solutions to education and government customers for over 26 years. Some of our most popular products include our brands of ruggedized CTL and to-go PC, laptops, convertibles, 2-in-1s, and tablets designed specifically for K-12 education. Over the last 2.5 years, we've worked with Google to introduce a line of CTL Chromebooks that have been recommended by PC Magazine as the best choice for Chromebooks in education. As part of our commitment to education, CTL is offering monthly professional development webinars for our education customers. These webinars will include a variety of topics relevant to K-12 EdTech, but we'll have a big focus on Google Apps for Education and Chromebooks in the classroom. Today's webinar is the Google Admin Console, presented by Katherine Livick of our professional development partner, Education Service District 112 of Vancouver, Washington. However, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We've got a larger group here today, so if we run out of time, you will be contacted by our sales representative to make sure all your questions are answered. Before we get started, we're just curious, we're going to take a little poll and find out how familiar people are with the Google Admin Console. So we'll give people a moment. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. We're not able to do this poll at this time. I'm sorry. I'm going to continue on and go ahead and introduce Katherine. She is our professional development partner from Education Service District 112 of Vancouver, Washington. She's a Google certified trainer and Google certified administrator and will take you through an overview of the Google Admin Console. I'm going to take a moment here and turn the screen over to Katherine.
Hi there, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, I can, yes.
Sorry about that. For some reason I kept trying to unmute and it just did not want to let me. Sorry about that. Well, hi there. Are you ready for me to go, Stephanie?
Absolutely. Take it away.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Hi, everybody. I'm Katherine Livick, and I'm a certified Google for Education trainer and a certified Google admin here at ESD 112. And we do a lot of training and in-district coaching with regards to Google Apps for Education. And I do some consulting with districts about how to get started with the Google Admin Console and how to best administer your Google Apps in the context of an education, a school district or an education environment, because it is a little bit different from what you run into if you're doing Google for work, the business end of things. if you have looked at any of the online administrator training or any of the help files or any of that kind of stuff for Google Admin, it's all kind of aimed at business. And then every now and then they'll say, oh, here's a way that it works a little bit differently for education, or there are exceptions, and of course we have different best practices for our sector. So that's why my kind of specialty is coming from the classroom as a classroom teacher. I want to see how we can best set up this Google environment for our teachers and students to facilitate learning. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. Today we're just going to go into an overview. There is a lot of stuff in the Google Admin Console. If you're already a sysadmin, a lot of it's going to be familiar to you. But one of the things that people need to know is, where is everything? It's not necessarily intuitive as to where it actually is. So I do a lot of helping people sleuth out, where is that setting that I want to change. And so we'll just do an overview and kind of talk about what's possible and some of the ways you can configure your workspace and your apps in Google Apps for Education. So what you can do as a Google admin is you have a user panel where you can create users, organize your users into user organizations, similar to the way it would be done with Exchange type of server. And manage your users, including suspending them, changing passwords, doing all of that kind of stuff with users. And you can, if you're in a Microsoft environment and you're switching over or adding Google to that environment, you can, there's some importing of user orgs you can do. There are directory sync tools. There's a lot of kind of additional will not seem too foreign to you. You can control access to services and apps within the Google environment, turn them on and off, make them available to only certain user organizations, and to some extent control how they're used and how they appear to your users, including having quite a lot of control over behaviors of Chrome, not just for Chrome devices, but also for how Chrome will behave on any device for a user that's logged into your domain. So that can get kind of interesting. You have a lot of control over domain management, mail routing, reports, sysadmin type stuff. Lots and lots of settings for mail. You have a pretty good level of control over that in the Google Admin Console. You can manage your enrolled Chromebooks and Android or iOS devices that are enrolled for management in your domain right from this console, and make a lot of decisions about how those things work. And there is a mobile app which allows you to perform some of your more basic admin tasks anywhere. It's a little bit more limited than what you would do on the web version of the console, but it is pretty handy. So when you first log into your admin console, it's admin.google.com. When you're logged into Chrome with your Google account, of which you're an admin, and you sign into that with an admin password, you'll be able to see your console. It looks like the little screenshot there. And a lot of people, when they first start out, are finding that some things are missing, or they're not seeing icons that they think they will see. And that's because Google likes to make things simple for you, and sometimes they like to make it even simpler than you would like it to be. So they hide some stuff. They just put the basics out there. And when you first go into your admin console, you'll see this more controls at the bottom. I have all of my icons pulled out, but I can drag and drop my icons around. I can rearrange them. If I use things more frequently, I can move them to the top. So I have a lot of control over how my environment as an admin looks. And that's the first hurdle that people kind of get to, is where is all the stuff that I can do? So once you've found all of your panels, you can also see that you've got this activity at a glance down the right sidebar, and it gives you a link to get that mobile app if you do want to control this from being on the road. Excuse me. So, user management. This is the most basic question that I tend to get asked with school districts that are moving into the Google environment, no matter where they're coming from, and especially with smaller districts that haven't had to worry about managing users and managing devices and do all this at once. It can get a little confusing at the beginning. So I get asked for advice on this a lot. You can create users manually or in bulk using a spreadsheet tool. You can have, in the business version, you can have users create their own accounts, but that's not something that has been available to education. But you can still do quite a few of them pretty quickly if you use their built-in tools. You can organize your users into user orgs that can be nested several orgs deep. And I'll switch to my console and show you kind of what my user panel looks like. I have a lot of people nested into these. These are my organizations I have my devices in, and then I have test and training organizations. Well, not most, many of the things that you can alter in the console can be changed by user org, not everything. But you have pretty fine control over who can do what. So if you start out with organizations for admin, staff, and students, you're doing pretty well. A lot of districts will organize it even further down into cohorts or graduation years or grade levels so that they can do even further fine control over what students can use. For instance, a lot of districts will not be turning on email for any student under 13, so everyone under 13 is going to be in a different user org than everyone over 13. Gmail gets turned off for the younger kiddos and is on for the older kiddos. That's just one way to handle it. But I have seen several districts who kind of thought, well, I don't need different user orgs, I'm just going to kind of dump everyone into the same organization, and they have had some pains from that later on. So I don't recommend that. I definitely recommend beginning with the end in mind when you start organizing your Google domain. And if you have user orgs that are coming over from Exchange, then that's a pretty simple thing to do. Password management is something else you can do here. You can change and reset individual passwords. You can pull a login token. So for instance, if you have a student or an employee who left a logged-in device somewhere and it's been stolen or they don't know where it is, you can at least log them out of their account remotely. You can suspend or delete users if necessary. If you delete a user, you can reassign ownership of their stuff, their documents, everything in their Google Drive to someone else before you delete them. And you also have powers using the app Vault, which is the e-discovery portion of the console, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, wherein you can freeze a user's account in case there is a disclosure that needs to be made of what is in their account. And that's limited to certain parts of the apps, but we'll get into that a little bit later. You can move users from one organization to another. You can rename a user. You can create aliases for them, and you can restore data that has been deleted to a certain extent. And in the admin console, you also can assign admin roles. There are quite a few pre-created roles, but you don't have to stick with those. You can create your own and give the powers to whomever you want. You can create a user creation role or a basic help desk role. You can create a reports only role for someone if you just want someone to keep an eye on usage and things that are coming out of your console or your domain. So you have a lot of fine control over that in the console as well. So, whoops, I'm sorry, I skipped a little slide there. So this is kind of the heart of what you do with the Google Admin Console that makes it googly. You have a lot of control over apps management. And with schools and education applications, one of the most frequent things that admins find themselves doing is making decisions about who gets to use what app, what are the implications of having an app turned on, turned off, restricted, and how do we go ahead about making those decisions. And we'll get into a little bit of general best practice at the end, but I spend a lot of time trying to give that education perspective. I don't really consider myself a sysadmin. I'm a teacher and I'm a trainer, and I want to always remind people that they shouldn't exist in an IT vacuum. We need to speak to the teachers because that's our purpose, is to educate kids. The teachers are using these tools, and you need to hear their perspective. Something that seems pretty obvious to an admin that, wow, I'm just going to turn that off because it's going to be a headache for me, may cause even more headaches for your educators. So I always encourage people to think at least twice before they turn something totally off for everyone, because they just might be doing something with it you haven't thought of. But that said, you have a lot of options. You can turn the apps off and on for different user orgs. You can change their behaviors and configure preferences of different apps. Some apps have a lot of preferences that you can change. Some apps don't have very much at all. But overall, there are a lot of options. Gmail and the mail options are pretty huge, particularly. There is a search function within some of these control panes, and so if I go into apps here and I look for my Google apps and I go into Gmail, I have a search box that's going to show up at the top when I'm in my advanced settings, because I have 7 zillion settings here, and even really experienced Google admins will use this, you know, search settings to find what they're looking for. And there's no shame in that. You don't have to remember where everything is. The other fun thing about Google is they do like to change things, and it usually is for the better, but occasionally something will suddenly be in a different place than you expected. So no shame in using that search function as much as you need to. I do recommend taking the time to just wander through all the options as much as you can for every app that you're going to be configuring, because some of the stuff that you're expecting, again, will not be where you expect it to be. For me, some of it seems like it's not in the most intuitive place, and that could just be the way my brain works. But I have to continually wander through that console and make sure that I kind of know where things are in case I need to make a change and I'm having trouble finding it. And again, please, just before you start turning things off completely, do talk to your instructional staff. There's a different philosophy depending on your district and your region and where you're at. Some districts start with a, well, we're only going to turn on the stuff we absolutely have to, and then hopefully they listen to requests from staff later on if they need to turn on more services. And some districts start with a very, very open idea. They only turn off the most, you know, kind of nebulous things, and then only turn anything else off as needed. And I've seen pretty good results with the philosophically open kind of approach, but that's just me. Everybody has to do what works for their district. Another pane that you have in your admin panel is the groups pane. And this one can get a little sticky depending on what kind of experience you have as an admin. Groups in Google, this is where you would create mailing lists or groups within your domain. And but it's not just mailing lists. There are different types of lists you can create, and there are also groups you can use as exception groups to get even more specific, or I hate to use the word granular as a buzzword, but that's really what you're doing. You're getting very, very specific about who can and cannot do a certain thing within a certain app in your domain. So a group could be an exception group. For instance, students in the student user org might be prohibited from using YouTube, but you could use an exception group to allow certain ones to do it. That's just one example of a lot of ways that you could use the exception groups. That's something that gets a lot of discussion in the admin discussion groups that I'm in, because people are always trying to figure out how to get a little more specific with their permissions. The mailing list, or the group list that you can create from the console and manage from the console, are 4 major types. So you have your basic mailing list, which is just like it would be in Outlook or an Exchange. You have a web forum, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a place for people to post discussions. And a Q&A forum, which is a little bit different just because you can have a little more control over who is leading the discussion. And you can have a collaborative inbox, which in some districts they actually use this as their help desk ticket system. The collaborative inbox allows users to submit questions, and it has the ability to have the admin of that inbox group assign each question to a certain user. So if you have an IT person who's watching the intake of the help tickets and then assigning each problem or issue out to a certain person to address, that's one use for collaborative inbox. So I think, Stephanie, whoops, sorry, I'm having issues with my mouse here. I think that you were going to do a little poll at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think I'm ready here now with the poll. And this poll will be about what type of device people are using in their organization. We've got choice Chromebooks, Windows devices, Apple devices, or a combination. And we're going to give folks, just a brief moment here to answer, and then we can share the results. We've got about 75% people who have voted, so we'll keep the poll open just a few more moments and then move on. Okay, it looks like most of the voting is done. %82 have voted. Anyone else? Okay, there's an overwhelming combination of devices. So we've got 9% Chromebook, 4% tie for Windows and Apple, and 83% combination. Okay, Catherine, thanks for the interruption.
No problem. And that seems pretty common where I'm at too. We have a very large percentage of the districts in our region who have gone Google, and a lot of them are buying Chromebooks, but a lot of them are also incorporating Android tablets or iPads or something else within their domain. And you can do a lot of management with multiple devices from the console, although it is really aimed at mainly at configuring Chrome OS devices or configuring Chrome for use on other devices. So that brings us nicely into device management. With your device management panel, sometimes this is one of the places where people get lost most often, and I'm no exception. I still have to go in here and kind of dig around sometimes for what I'm looking for. So it pays to become very familiar with what's in this pane of the admin console. You can configure network defaults here, push out a new password for a Wi-Fi network to your Chromebooks, define a default network for them to connect to if you want to. So that's one of the first things that you need to do. When you purchase Chromebooks or Chrome OS devices, you use the console to configure those. You start out by enrolling them, and You can view a list of serial numbers. You can see all the devices that are enrolled in your domain. And you can also turn on some options for recent activity. There's a screen capture option, depending on how your other settings are. So if something has gone missing and you want to see what's happening with it, that you have a few options there. There are some security-based options in here, and some people choose to enhance that with third-party security products too. But this is where you start when you're enrolling Chromebooks in your domain. You also have options to configure Chrome browser behaviors across all devices, and there are a lot of options there. This surprised me because I didn't really think about it before I was an admin in a Google domain, how much of my Chrome experience was controlled by my admin or could be controlled by my admin. And for me, sometimes things that I think will be in the device management pane are just in the Chrome management and vice versa. So again, one of those where you have to kind of be familiar with it. This is also where you set up the kiosk mode for a single app to run on your Chromebooks if you're using them, for instance, for testing. Or if you want a public session, for instance, if you're having users that are not in your domain that are going to access these, it's a lab that is open to people from outside the district or anything like that, that's where you set that up. And you push that mode out to your devices from the console. It always tells you it could take up to 24 hours to propagate to all devices. In my rather small domain that I have about 50 devices in, which are mostly Chromebooks, it's never taken more than 10 minutes. So I'm not going to make any promises, but I mean, you want to get out ahead of those things a little bit. But it does go a little faster than that most of the time, and good for them for under-promising and over-delivering. I always like that. You can also configure some preferences and management for mobile devices there, and there's plenty of Android control. There is iOS control, which is more of a recent innovation in the console. Of course, they started out just with Chrome and Android, and then the iOS options have grown kind of slowly over the last year and a half or so. So you do have some control over iOS devices enrolled in your domain for management. And if you have a Chromebox for meetings, you can manage it from the console as well. So if you're using that for a conference room or video conferencing device, you have some options for that in your console as well. When you look in the consoles, if you don't have your own, you have your device management pane right here. And it logged me out. Thanks, Google. Oops. Always remember your password when you're an admin. That's really helpful. Or at least be able to type it properly. And while it's doing its thing here, I'm going to mention something I would have brought up later anyway. I usually recommend that people use two-factor authentication on their admin accounts. If you turn it on for everyone, you may run into some problems, but for an admin, it's not a bad idea because I don't know about anyone else, but if I'm running the mobile version of this admin console and I have it on my laptop and I might be logged into it on my Chromebook somewhere, I just feel like there are a lot of places that someone could, do something problematic if I leave my phone laying around. So for admins, it's not a bad idea to enforce that two-factor authorization. You can turn it on and just let it be an option for your users, or you can choose to enforce it, and you do need to be careful about your choices there. Oh, there we go. It figured itself out. So in device settings, you have network, mobile, and Chrome management. If I had a Chromebox in my domain, you'd see it here too. The network one is the one that I always forget exists because I go, where are my Wi-Fi settings? Well, they're under network. Makes sense, but it's just one of those things that sometimes I forget has its own little area. So I have some options here with my networks. I have Chrome devices all in their own little pane here, and this is where I can see all my devices. Mine are all in their own user org for Chromebook labs, so I can push a preference out just to a certain Chromebook lab and not to another one, which for me is very useful for my training purposes. And here's our Chrome management options here. And there are a lot of them. So this is one of the panels that I advise people to get very familiar with. User settings, for me, the thing that I get asked the most often, and the thing that I myself have trouble with sometimes, remembering if a setting is in device settings or in user settings. And it doesn't always make sense to my brain where they chose to put something. It's not a criticism, that's just how it works. Fortunately, you can search settings in this panel too. I can set these behaviors by user org, and I can make a lot of decisions about what I'm going to do with Chrome, no matter what device it's being used in. So there's a lot going on in device management. This is one of the panes I think that admins seem to access the most. Presentation does not want to go into the next slide. Hang on just a second here, guys. I'm going to have to reload this thing. Oops, there we go. Now it's decided to skip a few slides ahead. Sorry about that. Perhaps I need to get in and give my instance of Chrome some kind of a spanking, because it's not behaving itself. I'll be right back with you. All right. Well, we always tell our teachers that we're working with that we want them to be flexible. We call it living in beta. So yeah, when your presentation crashes in the middle of what you're doing, you just kind of got to roll with it. So I apologize for that, but it seems to have gotten its wits about it again here. So one of the other things that admins ask me a lot, very often, is oops, sorry about that, is the reports that are available. And depending on how big a domain you're running, you could be using these quite heavily. For smaller domains, sometimes people are just looking at it, you know, taking a glance here and there. And I find with a lot of districts that are just coming on board with Google Apps, this is a really convenient place for them to look and just briefly see how usage is going. So when you're adopting Google Apps and maybe you're switching over.
I'm
sorry.
We can't see your screen.
Oh, well, that's weird because it's telling me it's showing it. Hang on. Let's try this again. Thank you for telling me.
There we go.
I don't want to bore everybody.
There you
Better?
go. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was a little strange. Sorry about that. All right, so you're seeing the reports slide now, right?
Yep.
Fabulous. See, we layer these technologies on top of each other, and sometimes it gets a little scary. So, sorry about that.
No problem.
All right. Yeah, let me know if that happens again, and I will see if I can fix it. Okay. So with your reports, there's this great little at-a-glance kind of graph like you see on the slide, and that's really good for just being able to let people know, hey, is anyone using this stuff? What are they doing? You know, are people using it more? Are they using it less? And in my role as a coach, I'm always interested in asking districts, you know, how this usage activity is going, because I'm there trying to get more people to use their Google stuff, and this is a really great way to just get that data and see if that's actually happening. So there are a lot of pre-made reports. You can also kind of customize your own. There are security reports, auditing, usage, lots of different stuff you can do in there, and it just depends on what you're trying to find out, but it's pretty widely configurable. You can also set alerts for kind of activity and designate recipients for those alerts. For instance, you can have it send an admin an email or any kind of alert that you would like for a suspicious login or any kind of user activity that you would want as an admin to be alerted about. And you can kind of at a glance see device activity, versions, boot modes. If you're wondering if all your Chromebooks actually got the latest Chrome OS update, this is one of the places that you would be able to go to see that. And so this one gets kind of a lot of action in the console as well. Company profile, this one's not, it doesn't have a lot of stuff in it, but this is one of the ones I get asked about a lot because it has some pretty basic things that, again, in my personal brain, I go, oh, is that where that actually would be? And I forget where it is. So things like your company name, the logo that goes on all of your Google Apps stuff, like the corner of your Gmail pages. Those are designated there, so you can keep those current with the company profile pane. The feature release schedules are set here too, and that's something that people tend to have kind of a lot of trouble with. Google likes to change things, and they change things frequently, and almost always it's for the better, but sometimes things are a little problematic in the transition. And they also aren't really great about announcing it. So they'll kind of like make major changes to Classroom, and they'll tell you about it the day they do it, and it's a week before school starts or a day before school starts. So you have some control as an admin over how those features are rolled out to your users. You can do the rapid release schedule, where anything that Google unleashes upon the Google apps is just rolled right out, or you can have a couple of weeks of warning where you can get ahead of training and warning people about what's going to happen or anything that's going to look different. Changes like that tend to freak users out, even if they don't change the function a lot. When something looks different, we get confused and we don't, see things where we expected, and it can be a little bit freaky. So that's something to think about. Thinking about your user base and how flexible they are and how you would like to get in front of those feature releases. And also when they release new things into the console, new apps, for instance, Google My Maps became part of the education array of apps a little while ago, and it didn't automatically turn itself on. You had to go in and turn it on. So those are the kinds of things you have to kind of keep aware of, and we'll have some links at the end. There are some blogs you might want to follow and some places you want to keep informed about what is going on with the apps. Security options. In your security pane, you have password strength monitoring. It's pretty easy to do. You can also monitor, if you choose to have Google Plus on for your users, you can monitor their activity and view their profiles kind of from a central location, which some people find very comforting because social media does freak us out when we have our users representing us, so that's kind of a good thing to be able to do. This is the place where you would enable or enforce the two-step verification, and there is a possibility that if you enforce it before your users have voluntarily enrolled in it, you can lock people out. So there is a little bit of thinking about that process that you need to do before you decide to enforce it. And I have a lot of districts who are kind of rural and have a hard time with two-step verification because they can't get a cell phone signal, stuff like that. So there's some planning to be done before you decide you're going to do that, although it is a great security feature. There are some other more advanced security options here. API Reference SSO, authentication protocols are all accessible from within this pane. And so before we go to questions, I just wanted to kind of talk about the general best practices that I advise for education domains. And I work with a lot of different districts on this stuff, so I see kind of how it's implemented in large districts, small districts, districts with different populations, different types of values. And these are kinds of the things that I find to be useful for everyone to know. And this is just, these are my opinions, but this is what I've seen work well in other districts. So if you begin with the end in mind and start out by really carefully thinking about how you're going to form your user organizations, you're going to have a much better experience with apps generally. The most pain that I have seen is when a district kind of said, oh, let's get a Google domain, and they just kind of threw everybody into the same organization, and nothing really came of it, and then they bought a bunch of Chromebooks, and all of a sudden people are using it, and they're having trouble really getting things configured properly for staff versus students, and then they have to go back and kind of move everybody around, and it really has been painful for some districts. So let's just start out, with that kind of slow lead up and really thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and who are the different groups that you're serving in your district. Two-step authentication, I already mentioned this a couple times, but just consider enforcing that or making it a policy for admins, but maybe not for everybody else. So just kind of think about that one before you launch into it. I've already kind of mentioned, communicating with your instructional staff. This is just of paramount importance because people aren't going to use tools that don't work for them. And all of the Google tools are kind of designed to work together. It's an ecosystem. It's not just individual stuff. So if you turn off, for instance, Gmail, you're getting rid of a pretty important notifications channel, not the only one, but it's something that kind of can put a hitch in things. So before you turn stuff completely off, it's good to think about it and make sure that you have a really straightforward procedure for staff to request access to services. A lot of districts, we have admins who are open to turning on a service for a certain user group, but they don't get the message because people don't know who to ask or how to ask for it. Or they don't even know what to say. Some people will just go, is there a way for me to do this thing? And if they don't know who to ask, they're not going to ask those questions. So make sure that they actually know how to get to you if they have those questions. Optimally, you would have a tech planning team that includes teachers to help you evaluate the requests you're getting and how necessary they are and where the potential pitfalls could be. When there are changes, new features, or when you're changing access to a particular service or how something will behave, communicate ahead of time as much as you can. It'll never eliminate the people who are going to flip out no matter what. There's always those people. But it will definitely reduce the amount of people you have getting upset by these changes. And that's, again, that's a Google thing. You've got to be rolling with the punches. You have to be able to just keep going when something changes. So you got to have to kind of model this from the top down. If you can set up your scheduled release for new features, that makes it a lot easier for you as an admin to get out ahead of that stuff. And Vault, this is always a question that comes up. In your admin panel, you have Vault, which is the e-discovery, can freeze a user account, and if you have a Freedom of Information request or a legal matter that needs to be addressed, this is something you will use. I advise just being really careful with Vault. People ask me all the time, how should I set up Vault? And I tell them I am not a lawyer and I do not want to answer that question. It's a little tricky. You need to be sure you understand what Vault does retain, what it doesn't retain, how it affects individual apps like Gmail versus Docs versus Hangouts. And you need to know your laws and rules and regulations for how long you retain things, what you're supposed to be retaining, and in what case you actually freeze an account. So just be really careful with that. And make sure that you're getting some outside advice from someone with some legal credentials. So I have some links and resources for you. I'll just talk about these for a second, and then we'll have these go out to you later. There are some places online when you're looking for help as a Google admin, and one of the things that's actually really great about the Google console is that if you don't have a bazillion users, a lot of time we just have one Google admin running the whole show. You have to have a backup super admin so that in case you get struck by lightning or something, your domain is still controllable. But you can do a lot as just one person with minimal amount of time. So I don't recommend that. I'm just saying that if you have a small staff, there are ways for you to get help in how to set things up, and there's a lot of information online, links and resources like this, that will help you get through it. So there's a whole walkthrough site that will help you set up your domain. If you haven't been a Google Apps admin, or if your sysadmin is just getting familiar with the Google Apps environment, I do recommend the Google Apps Admin Fundamentals course. It's meant to prepare you for the admin test for certification, but you don't have to take the test. There's no charge for this course, and it's a little e-learning platform that Google Apps has set up that's pretty cool, and we'll take you through the basics of it in a pretty rapid way if you're just trying to get up to speed. There's a link here we'll share with you about getting started with Vault that is one of Google's files on the matter, but again, get as much advice as you can on that. The Google Guru has a lot of interesting admin console presentations that might be helpful if you're just starting out. And my most important recommendation I make to Google admins is that there is a Google Plus community for admins in education, and the conversations there have been absolutely invaluable to me as I got started as an admin, and when I hear questions from other districts that I can't answer, and I certainly can't answer all of them, I direct them there, and they almost always find some kind of useful feedback. So I highly recommend joining that community if you can. So that is what I've got for you today. Stephanie, are you doing another poll?
No, we're going to go ahead and move on to the questions portion. Anna's been gathering our questions, and so I'm going to turn it over to her. Thanks for this.
Great. Thank you, Katherine. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Katherine, our first question is from LJ, and he would like to know, what is API Reference and SSO?
Well, I'm not qualified to speak too much about that because I am not so much of a sysadmin on that end of it. SSO is single sign-on, which is if you have multiple services for your users. For instance, at my agency that I work at, we have one login that logs us into our Outlook email, our OneDrive, our Google Apps domain for the whole agency. So if you want to set that up, that's where you would do it. As far as how to set it up, I am not the person to ask, but that's what it does. API is the application programming interface. So if you have custom apps or third-party apps that are running via your domain that need access to stuff in your domain, data or login tokens or anything like that, that's how you set that up. Again, I know what it does. I cannot tell you how it does it. I'm not not on that end of things, but that's kind of some of the stuff you have control over there.
Great. Thank you, Katherine. Our second question today was submitted by Patty, and Patty would like to know, are there other security options to help or to keep student information secure? She's heard other tech coordinators in her district use Hapara or CloudLock. Do you have any thoughts on these or others?
I have some districts who use those. I am just getting to know Hapara myself because I've just started coaching in a district that uses it, but I'm certainly not an expert. Hapara gives you a lot more control over the student interface, and it gives the teachers kind of more of a digital environment to teach, and gives them the ability to kind of see when a student is logged into their classroom environment what they're viewing. So if you told a kid to be in Google Apps and they're on a different page, you can kind of see that. And some people feel a lot better about that, you know, and I've admitted that I've sometimes missed the ability to kind of view a student's screen and see what they're up to without walking over there. But I mean, classroom management is very, you know, unique to every teacher. So some teachers really like Hapara, some don't. As far as what Hapara does for you from a security perspective, I can't really speak to that. I've heard good things about CloudLock. There are a couple of other services, some of which are associated with, you know, filter services as well, like the kind of a web filter with extra googly stuff added on. I can't bring any of them to mind right now, but there are a lot of options out there for things that you can do, and third-party add-ons for your domain.
Great. Thank you. Katherine, we also have another question submitted by Don today. Don, it looks like he's having trouble getting extensions to show up in the public session, and he was wondering if you could assist with that.
That is interesting. So extensions that you've pushed out, I assume, to all of your Chrome instances. I have not run into that problem, so I'm not sure how you would address that. I would highly recommend going into the GAFE admins. On the Google Plus. It's GAFE, G-A-F-E, admins community, and it's a closed community you have to ask to join. And we will send those links out, I assume, right, Stephanie and Anna?
Yes.
Yeah, and you'll have that link there, but that's where I would go. That would be the first place I would go to ask about that question, because I have not had that problem. And I mean, the first thing I would check is to make sure that I actually pushed the extensions to the organization I thought I was, because I personally am notorious for clicking the wrong org and then going, why didn't it work in this org? And it's because I didn't do it right. I'm not saying that's your problem, but that's the first thing I have to check, because that's where I seem to mess up. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katherine. We have another question submitted. This was submitted by LJ. He would like to know the difference between groups and orgs, and is there a difference?
There is a difference, and actually when you go through that admin fundamentals course, they spend quite a lot of time belaboring that difference, which I was annoyed by when I took the course, but was grateful for later. The user orgs are your top-level organizations, so every user in your domain is in the top level, and then you can split them out into teachers, students, administrators, whatever groups you want. And those are your broader strokes for what you enable, disable, and how you control things. So for the very basics, teachers might have access to YouTube, students might not. That's a pretty common distinction in the districts that I work in, although more and more domains are opening up YouTube to students because it's used so heavily. So groups are actually intended to set up mailing lists, but you can also give some other privileges with regard to apps to groups. So you can say, here's this student group that doesn't have YouTube, but maybe you can say, Mr. Smith's class is doing a project and they need access to YouTube, and so I'm going to put the kids from his class into this group. I don't have to move them out of the student user org. They still have all the same restrictions and privileges as any other student. They just have the added ability to do that one app that other students can't do. So that's, I think that's the best I can explain it in the abstract, and honestly the best way to do it is to go in. I have a lot of fake users. You may have seen my 27 club in there when I was in my console. And I go in and I experiment on them regularly. So I think making some user orgs and then making some groups and logging in as those other users and seeing how it affects their experience is really the best way to know how it's going to work.
Great. Thank you, Katherine. We have a question submitted, another question submitted by Susan. And Susan's question, she would like to take the fundamentals course, but her super administrator already created the domain name, and she cannot move past this in the training without purchasing another domain. Can you help or give advice on this?
Oh, so if you're saying that you're not a super admin, I'm not sure. Yeah, there's a lot. The training is aimed at super admin privileges, and I'm not sure how you would address that if you're not able to be a super admin. It's possible they would make you one temporarily. There are, of course, things in that course that they simulate that you would not want to test out on a real domain. And when I teach classes on the admin console, I ask people to come with their logins for their own domain, but I warn them that they really probably don't want to go all the way to activating some of these things while they're sitting in a class, because panic may ensue back home. These things, like we said, do propagate faster than they often say they're going to. So yeah, I'm not sure. That would be kind of a domain-specific question.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
Oh, no, thank you, Katherine. Katherine, we have another question. This question was submitted by Christine. She writes, glad you mentioned OneDrive. Our district is completely dedicated to HP/MS Office and OneDrive. There are concerns that the two systems won't work together. Is this your experience?
Well, I see a lot of districts blending the two in a variety of ways, some more successful than others. In my experience, there's no reason you can't have both of them running. If you're on the IT end of things, I mean, you have to have enough people to run the Exchange server stuff and do the Google admin. Generally what happens is it doesn't take like hiring a whole person to add on a Google domain, because it is so easy to manage, particularly with regards to devices. It just does not take a whole person's worth of time usually. So they can exist in harmony. Like I said, that's very individual. And I've seen, you know, for me as a trainer and a professional developer and a teacher, I feel like, man, it's a lot more for people to digest when they're trying to learn how to run, say, stuff on OneDrive and stuff on Google Drive at the same time. However, if you start your training with the concept of the cloud and what we're actually doing here, that my stuff is not on this device, but it's on a server and I can access it from anywhere, once they get that with either the Microsoft 365 end of things or the Google Drive end of things, it gets a little smoother because they have the basic concept. And I think, excuse me, sometimes we as trainers forget, you know, or we neglect that stuff. The only issue that I've seen be weird, really, is that when if you're going to switch to using Gmail as your mail for your whole domain or whole district, in what I've seen, it seems like ripping the Band-Aid off and just switching everything over is better than kind of doing a slow change because there's going to be some pain around the change, and it's kind of good to get it over with. So that would be my only advice based on what I've seen. Otherwise, I think that they do coexist peacefully if you have admins who are willing to work together on it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Katherine. I think that is about the end of our time today with questions.
Yes, thanks for answering all those. And just to remind everybody, you know, you can have your questions answered by our sales representative. We've gathered them and we'll make sure that they get back to you on that. And thanks, Katherine, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions, you can actually contact Anna Roach, and her email is aroach@ctl.net. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of CTL and our presenters, thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.